We're going to start out by taking a verbal roll call. So Commissioner Hemmer, are you here?
Present.
Commissioner Bergeron, are you here?
Present.
Commissioner Weiner, are you here?
Present.
Great. Good morning, fellow commissioners. Coming up shortly, we're going to be taking public comment calls for all agenda items. Members of the public wishing to speak on matters posted for public comment time may call the following phone number: 629-255-1939. Again, that number is 629-255-1939. And we're going to circle back just a moment to see if we have anyone on the line. Before we get started, we need to address it. This is a virtual meeting, so I move that the proposed agenda constitutes essential business and meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and well-being of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. Do I have a second?
Commissioner Hemmer, second.
Great, and we'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hemmer?
Aye.
Commissioner Bergeron?
Aye.
Commissioner Weiner?
Aye.
And I am aye as well. With that vote, we can officially call the meeting to order. So welcome to the March 2021 Fair Board meeting, everyone. I'm going to read our legal notice as information for our audience. If you're not satisfied with the decision made by the Metropolitan Board of Fair Commissioners today, you may appeal the decision by petitioning for a writ of cert with the Davidson County Chancery or Circuit Court. Your appeal must be filed within 60 days of the date of the entry of the board's decision. To ensure that your appeal is filed in a timely manner and that all procedural requirements have been met, please be advised that you should contact your own independent legal counsel. All right, first up on the agenda here, we have last meeting's minutes. They were circulated yesterday to the board, so we can have a chance to look over these and let me know when there's a motion.
Commissioner Hemmer, a motion to approve.
Commissioner Bergeron, second.
Okay, excellent. We'll take a roll call vote on that. Commissioner Hemmer?
Aye.
Commissioner Bergeron?
Aye.
Commissioner Weiner?
Aye.
Excellent, and I am an aye as well. Moving on to public comment time. For members of the public wishing to call in, I'm going to read that number again in case anyone missed it. If you'd like to make a comment, please call us at 629-255-1939. Now we're going to open the floor for public comment. As a reminder, according to our bylaws, each caller has 2 minutes to speak, and we'll cap the public comment time at 15 minutes total. So I think, Laura, you're gonna keep a track on the 2 minutes, and I'll keep a tab on the total. That being said, if there's anyone we don't get to hear from today, please, as always, feel free to email us or call us, board members. We've already received about, I'd say, roughly 16 emails over the last few days from folks in regards to the letter of intent signed between the mayor and Bristol Motor Speedway. I just letting everyone know that those have been received and are appreciated and are going to be compiled for feedback. Additionally, we're going to address this further when we get to this agenda item in today's meeting, but we are working to create many future opportunities for public input on this topic. So we'll come back to that in just a little bit. In the meantime, Christy and Allison, do we have anyone on the line?
Right now we have 4 callers in the queue. We'll just 1 second, okay?
Okay.
Hey, Chairwoman McAnally, this is Commissioner Bergeron. I just with public comment and with us not being able to be there, I think it's more important than ever that these callers provide their full name and address, just so we know who they are.
Yep.
Thanks.
Sure thing.
I think I'm up. My name is Tanner. I live at 505 Southern Turf Drive, about a half a mile from the Keyway. I'm calling in regards to the expansion of the racetrack to include NASCAR events and the LOI signed between the mayor and Bristol Motorsports. Our largest concern, myself and a number of other neighborhood residents, is that the LOI currently contemplates no restriction around the number of race days. Right now, this fair board and the community has worked really hard in kind of curbing the amount of noise coming from that speedway in terms of number of race days and number of track rentals and practices that are allowed. That LOI with just the 4 NASCAR level events already exceeds the number of race days that are currently on our schedule, and it's far more disruptive. NASCAR cars hit about 140 decibels, give or take, and that's going to echo throughout our community. Bristol Motorsports has already hired a high-priced consulting firm to spin this like it's something that everyone wants. I can assure you it isn't. This is not the same as local racing. It's not the same by a long shot. Bristol's biggest argument right now is, well, you knew there was a racetrack, didn't you? That's a ridiculous argument to me, and it's really designed to misdirect the public. NASCAR is absolutely not the same as local racing. They need to at least be subject to the tight dates and times for the uses of the track to make this more bearable. It needs to be set and locked in at 3 or 4 weekends, and that is it. Allowing an open-ended lease will open the door for racing every single weekend from March to October. If you want to take a look at the current circuit of events at the actual Bristol Motor Speedway, they have something 3 to 4 weekends a month for 6 months. That will make this area unlivable. We're not asking for a whole lot. We just need some peace and quiet, the same that is granted to the majority of Nashville. This is a really aggressive timeline to put $50 million in debt. I work in finance. $50 million is not a small number, and Bristol isn't guaranteeing that debt. So we're going to be on the hook as taxpayers if they renege on the track. There's just too many unknowns right here. We're moving too quickly. We need a lot more community impact, and I'm hoping that this will engage with the community in a very meaningful way.
Thank you, caller. Christy? Do we have more callers on the line?
Chairman McAnally, your caller is on the line.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here with us. Can you please identify yourself and state your address?
Yep, 1708B Neal Terrace.
Great. You have 2 minutes. Go right ahead. What's your name?
Tanya.
Great. Thank you. Go right ahead.
Well, first of all, I just appreciate you guys having a public comment line for us to come and speak. I have to admit I was caught off guard by the LOI that was signed. We had heard for some time that there were rumors of a NASCAR track being built over here, but I feel like the way it was done, it was purposely done at a time where we're in a not only local and national crisis, but a worldwide crisis where everyone's worn down from the election season that we just went through. We're coming off of a huge property tax increase, which, by the way, I do support. I understand the need for that. But the fact that this was done so quickly without really any discussion from the public, when MLS had to go through 2 years of discussions with our neighborhood in order to get their stadium built, I just think that it's honestly mean. And I know that sounds silly, but this is going to be a huge impact to us. The cars that are there as it is are very loud, but I know that that's the history of the area, and we knew that coming into it. But the level of noise that's going to come from these cars is like having an airport right next to your house or building an airport downtown. I have compiled a list of research on all of the other NASCAR tracks, in the country and looked up how close they are to schools and how many attendees per acre for each of these tracks. And Nashville is bad on every single metric compared to all of the other stadiums. There is a school less than a quarter of a mile away from where the track will be. I understand the races may start a little bit later, but children are in aftercare until 6 o'clock at night. And the fact that that school is predominantly minority and low income who don't have an option to lottery into a different school because their parents may not be able to get them to and from school every day, this would never happen in a white community. This would never be allowed to happen in a more affluent community. There's also a ton of public housing where, again, those people don't have a choice to sell their house and make a profit and move. I just think the whole thing was really done underhandedly. And if this is going to happen and if this is going to go through, fine. But I would think that the community should have a say in how often races can be held. I don't think it would be right to allow events there 365 days a year with no regard for the people who live here. I have 2 small children. The youngest is 2. How is she going to go to sleep at night with the noise level of these vehicles? And so this is a really big concern for our neighborhood.
Tanya, I'm sorry. This is Laura Womack. I'm sorry to interrupt. Your 2 minutes are up.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tanya. We really appreciate it. Christy, whenever you're ready with the next caller.
Chairman McAnally, your caller's on the line.
Good morning, caller. Thank you for joining us. Can you please identify yourself and state your address?
Okay, try again, Chairman McAnally.
Good morning, caller. Thank you for calling in. Can you please identify yourself and state your address? And you have 2 minutes. Hello?
Hello?
Hi. Good morning.
Oh, I thought. Good morning. I'm sorry. I thought it was calling into the general audience of listening.
Oh, gotcha. Do you have a public comment to share?
Well, it's not the. Yeah, I mean, I really haven't thought about it, but now that I'm on the line, you're asking me. Sure.
Well, can you please identify yourself first and let us know your address, and then you have 2 minutes.
Absolutely. So I'm going to go on. I'm going to fly off the cuff here. This is Michael Cole, and we live at 1716 Neal Terrace, which is about a mile from the fairgrounds. And just in looking over just the information, my question or comment would be, how, with the increased noise levels and impact to things like the elementary school, the tenants and people who live in the surrounding areas, how is that going to be addressed? Because as it is, the current racing that's out there is loud enough. This is much more from my understanding. So I'd like to hear some commentary on that.
Okay, great. Just so you know, we'll be discussing this during the agenda item a little later in the meeting. Thank you so much for calling in. Christy, whenever you're ready.
Your caller's on the line.
Great. Good morning. Could you please identify yourself, state your address, and then you have 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah, my name is Heidi, and I live at 1711 Neal Terrace. Since 2002, and for 10 years, I've worked closely with the fairgrounds to address neighborhood impact from events. I'm still very involved, and people do not support this expansion for the following reasons. At under 1,000 feet, Fall Hamilton Elementary is the closest school to a racetrack in the country. It is also 85% black and brown children. If this was in an affluent area, it would not happen. The ugly history of this racetrack and the city's treatment of it can no longer be ignored. Rendering the school useless after 3 p.m. is cruel to the children and the educators who teach them. No amount of event predictability or marketing changes the fact that you would be responsible for limiting possibilities of children for money. Why is the mayor rushing to do this during a pandemic when public engagement is difficult? If the deal is good now, it will be good in a year. I suspect he knows loaning $50 million will not be popular, and that's why he's pushing this. Since neighbors got involved, community engagement has been at the core of the relationship with the fairgrounds, but substantial engagement is nowhere in the media coverage or the yellow lie between the mayor and Bristol Motor Speedway. Thanks to our councilmen, the fair board, and neighbors, hard limits on the number of events and the other protections help make living near this track more tolerable. Impact on the community must decrease. Community engagement must increase. Soccer Holdings spent 2 years to meet with people. Why is Bristol being held to a different standard? Is Bristol being required to guarantee the $50 million in debt, just like Soccer Holdings has to guarantee all of theirs? What about the mayor's plan to reduce 80% carbon emissions by 2050? NASCAR is terrible for the environment. We should be moving away from this, not towards this activity. Finally, the noise peaking at 140 decibels won't just affect all of us around the area. It will negatively affect life in the surrounding 5-mile area. Bristol was recently and is routinely studied as the loudest track in America. It is a shorter track on a larger piece of property. We have a NASCAR track opening 36 miles away, and like Bristol Speedway, you guessed it, it's on hundreds of acres. This plan has flat tires. Nashvillians deserve to be informed of all the facts and have every opportunity to engage regarding the changes that will permanently damage quality of life, work, school, and property values. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Heidi.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Chairman McAnally, we have no more callers, but we just need to give a little bit of a delay in case someone's trying to call in.
Okay, you got it. Just let me know when someone's on the line or we're good to move on, please.
No more calls.
Okay, great. We will officially close public comment, but again, please reach out to us. We definitely want to hear from everyone about this and are planning, like I said, much community engagement. Okay, next up we have the financial report from Citrice. Citrice, you can take it from here.
Good morning, everyone. The information presented today is preliminary, and all revenue and expenses for February 2021 may not have been recorded to the ledgers as of March 5th, 2021, when this report was created. The preliminary actuals through February 2021 are as follows. The revenues through February are $335,266. Expenditures are around $1,431,091, resulting in a net loss of approximately $1,095,825. Depreciation expense is $832,896. So the total net loss is roughly $1,928,721. Below you will find an itemized list of our expenditures. Our top 3 expenses are payroll, utilities, and insurance/low-cap. Payroll expense is approximately $753,878, which represents 53% of our total expenses. Utilities expense is $267,145, which represents 19%. Insurance, permits, and low-cap expense is $260,191, which is 18% of our total expenses. I'd like to mention that we have submitted our FY22 budget information to the Department of Finance and are scheduled to have a budget meeting March 31st, 2021. This concludes the financial report. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Satrice?
Chair, I do have a question.
Sure, go right ahead.
This is Commissioner Weiner. I noticed on the variance report that you had sent us, there was a notation that there was a COVID pandemic expense that was charged to the operating account in error. Would you and Laura mind clarifying that, please?
I can clarify it. It was for something to do with transporting food to the municipal auditorium. And I was to do a journal entry to move that expense to the appropriate COVID account, because we have two COVID accounts. We have one that's to be coded if they're expenses before December 30th, and then there's one post-COVID. And so it hit the wrong COVID account. And so when I was doing the journal entry, instead of me putting it into the correct COVID account, I journal entered it into the operating. So that has since been corrected, but before the report came out, it hadn't posted. So on next bar report, that will be cleared up and corrected and adjusted.
So was that, insofar as it being COVID related, it was transporting food for the purpose of the folks that were at the other facility?
Yes.
Okay, just another random question. How did it get delivered to our facility in the first place? Is that the standard protocol, or is that?
Well, D&D Events was providing food for municipal. So they rent a van or something from Enterprise in order to transport the food from Fairgrounds to municipal. And so
they charged it. Okay. Okay, that helps clarify it some. I'm still not sure why the food is coming from the fairgrounds over to municipal. Is it being prepared at the fairgrounds?
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, well, that was a great explanation. I appreciate all your diligence and staying on top of it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Weiner. Do we have any other questions from the board? Okay, thank you so much, Satrice. We'll move on next to Executive Director's report. Laura?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Laura Womack. I want to start out by thanking staff. As you can imagine, during the cold snap and the ice storm, we had some challenges, both from trying to get out of our own homes and safely to work. But we also had some issues at the fairgrounds itself. We did experience some freezing, which damaged a sprinkler out on the canopies on Expo 3 that needed to be repaired. And also we had a water line break servicing the grandstand offices, and staff took care of that. So I do want to give them some recognition. It was a tough time to work, and as always, they responded as needed. Also, of course, the bad rainstorm that we have, we always are conscientious of what Browns Creek is doing. And I want to thank our weekend staff for being very diligent and monitoring the creek and letting us know and letting our partners know. We've got some construction materials being stored in the back, and making sure that our partners are notified to monitor those in the event of inclement weather. So we've had some trying weather times in the last, since we met last, and I just want to thank staff for their continued efforts to keep our property in good working order and safe. I do want to also just announce, since last Fair Board meeting, Commissioner Weiner was confirmed by Metro Council and will serve into 2026. So I want to welcome her more on a full-term basis, and congratulations to Commissioner Weiner. She's been a joy to have and certainly a help to me. So I want to welcome her officially in her new full term. I also want to mention that this capital spending plan was approved at council, and it did include $7 million for phase 2 of Fair Park. Council member Sledge put an amendment to the capital spending plan, and that was approved. So just wanted to make sure that you were all aware that that $7 million is in the capital spending plan. We are, now that we're kind of really wrapping up the Expo project, we are reconciling all of the costs and closing out the Skanska contract. With that, we have a much better idea of where we are in the budget. We've been very cautious about filling the rest of our fixtures and equipment need until we knew where we were on the budget. And since we did recognize some savings in several categories within the project, we have secured quotes for new tables and chairs to support our events when we get up and running again. And so that's exciting. We're going to be also looking at new pipe and drape. And if you have been to the fairgrounds and seen our beautiful ivory, gold, and royal blue pipe and drape, it's pretty obvious that those are decades old and need replacing. So we are going to be looking at having some modern pipe and drape, black, so it's a little bit better and a little bit more flexible for our events. So that's, for us, that's very exciting to know that we're going to be getting some new equipment in also to support our events. We've been continuing work on planning for a divisional fair. I did request a new position in our FY22 budget. So needless to say, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on Metro's side with finalizing the FY22 budget, but we recognize that a new position to help us plan and execute a fair in whatever capacity that is, we wanted to make sure that we have enough human resources capacity and staff to do that appropriately. So that request has been submitted. We've connected with fair professionals to kind of give just a little insight to how other people run fairs of similar size to what we're looking at with our divisional fair. I did connect with the CEO of the California Mid-State Fair, and one of the unique things that Colleen has dealt with is they see approximately 400,000 guests on 45 acres during their fair each year. And they're known for their popular entertainment lineup. They're kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and yet they bring in an incredible lineup of entertainment and is very much embraced by the community. And I really was interested in kind of how they built that up from the ground up. And so she has been very helpful. Also, I spoke with Emily Pitcock. She's from the Tennessee Association of Fairs, and she also sits on the Tennessee State Fair and Expo Commission. And that discussion centered around grant funding and what qualifications we need as a new fair to be eligible. So there is more follow-up to do on that, but in those initial conversations, it does look as if it would be 2024 before we would be eligible for funding. Part of that has to do with a membership into the Tennessee Association of Fairs, and you kind of have to have a fair before you can apply and be accepted into the Tennessee Association of Fairs. And since we would be considered a new divisional fair, the Tennessee State Fair relocates to Wilson County, we do have to have a couple years under our belt before we would be eligible for that funding. So we do have a call. We're setting up a call this week with North American Midway. They have been a long-term partner with the Tennessee State Fair when it was on the property, and so we anticipate continuing that. as we look towards, again, planning our divisional fair. So work in earnest and with a sense of urgency continues with planning for the fair. I think that's pretty much it. I do have some other things, but we also have those topics set up as agenda items. So I'll defer any more comments to those individual agenda items unless anybody has any questions.
Laura, yes, this is Commissioner Hemmer. Do you have any timelines for when we need to make calls or do, certain gating items in regards to planning for a fair?
Can you repeat the last sentence for me, Commissioner?
Yeah, just curious about if there's any timelines or, or potentially deadlines that we need to be aware of for making a call, whether and how we need to plan for the fair.
Well, one of the big ones for me was to identify some funding sources and determine whether or not grants were available. And so that was the impetus for my call to Tennessee Association of Fairs to see if that was something that could be done now in advance. So knowing that funding is not going to be available to us for some time, that kind of puts the burden on us to come up with either a more unique, I guess, upfront, funding for the fair. So no, I think I'll learn more with NAME this week when we talk about the carnival. Oftentimes carnivals will, have their standing schedule done a year in advance because they're making a circuit and that they have our dates down. I think there is going to definitely be a decision that's got to be made just from a pandemic standpoint, whether or not we will have the opportunity to have a fair this year under the circumstances with capacity. And so that obviously would need to be made relatively soon just for planning purposes. Hopefully that answered. It's a lot of unknowns at this point, so I apologize for that.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions for Laura? Laura, thank you for your diligence on that, and we're here to help. Commissioner Weiner, welcome back, and we look forward to serving alongside you. Thank you for accepting the position. And also thanks to Councilman Sledge for his diligence on Fair Park.
Chair, I just want to chime in and say thank you to everybody for their support. It was an interesting process being on the other side of it, and I'm just happy to be here to help.
Great, thank you so much. All right, we will move on now to old business. First up, we have Fairgrounds Improvement Update. Mr. Henley, are you here with us?
I am. Good morning, Commissioner McAnally.
Good morning.
Good morning, board. Good morning, staff and council. You all should have been provided with budget dashboards, both Fairgrounds Improvement Project as well as the Fair Park project dated February 28th. I will start by saying the figures that are presented and discussed today are approximately 30 to 45 days in arrears of the work that's actually been performed. And so just making sure that I give that disclaimer as the budget that's presented is based off of expenses recognized by payment of invoices. There's not a lot of spend since the report last month, but I do want to highlight that the allocation for the Fairgrounds Improvement Project has crossed the threshold to where now there is just shy of $2.5 million remaining in terms of cost to complete for the projected scopes. As mentioned last time, construction and the contract related to Skanska USA is working to be closed out. Since our last board meeting, there has been removal of encumbrances related to that contract, so increasing the capacity for the expenditures forthcoming. Additionally, we have began work and billing related to the multi-purpose building or the maintenance facility. And the first invoice related to the construction of that project has gone out. The first invoice was related purely around insurances and bonding capacity for the project, as well as material deposits for the structure of the facility. That cost, that first billing was just over $20,000. And so very small on the front end, but we do expect that to pick up as we move through the project. Again, the demolition of structures, demolition is completed. That is another area where the project has been completed, and therefore the open purchase orders related to that construction have been closed out. And so no real movement in that section, but just wanted to highlight the administrative process that's going on as we move again to close out another portion of the improvements. One area that you will notice a change is in the grandstands area. There was approximately $40,000 that was remaining to be billed there related to HVAC needs of the grandstands. Lead company was performing that work and has submitted invoicing for that. And so their invoicing total has been recognized in the grandstands amount. And so that's the reason for that value adjustment and for that to be zeroed out at this point. Still going to work to ensure that any and all invoicing that may need to come in will be recognized before we say everything is done and buttoned up there. But just wanted to highlight that that area did have movement since our last report. And then the repairs, demolition, and site master planning done early on in the fairgrounds improvement process. There was no movement there at all. And so again, brings the overall paid to date as of February 28th to $38,525,611. And again, leaving a cost to complete for remaining expenditures under $2.5 million at $2.4 million. I ask if there are any questions before I move on to the Fair Park segment of the budget. Okay, hearing none, I will start by saying there was no monetary movement on Fair Park in terms of the dollars. Again, Skanska USA was the contracting firm or the construction manager for that project, and so again, that release of encumbrances is tied to the Fair Park portion of the budget update. And I also want to say that the funds that are represented here in terms of spend to date are not to be intermingled or confused with, and have no relation to the $7 million that was mentioned previously about the capital spending plan. The $8,475,000 that was spent for the Fair Park project, considered Fair Park Phase 1, is all done and exclusive of the $7 million in the capital spending plan. Out of the funds that were allocated for Fair Park, there's just shy of $220,000 remaining from that initial allocation that is within the discretion of the fairgrounds. Again, while I've given the disclaimer about 30 to 45 days, this work is current and up to date just because there was no physical movement related to the project. Are there any questions about either the fairgrounds improvement portion of the budget or the Fair Park portion of the budget? Great. Well, recognizing that there aren't any, I will turn it over to Ron Gobble to give an update. I'm sure he will talk about MLS as well as infrastructure. So, Ron, if you're ready, I'll pass the mic to you.
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate that. And good morning, everybody. As Ed mentioned, the multipurpose building is ramping up. We're trying to coordinate permitting with it and the infrastructure project, as well as the other projects, active projects going on the campus. And that's really where most of the efforts have been going on over the last month, is really in this coordination effort to make sure that all the bases are covered. So that's the multipurpose building is a metal building. It's going to be used primarily for the maintenance crews to store and repair equipment, et cetera. And we see that as a 6 to 8 month project. The infrastructure project is, as I said, is coordinating with all the various entities as things continue to ramp up. We've got the stadium is going along well, and we're trying to hit the milestones that they need. And we're also working with mixed use as they begin to wrap up and get more specific about their plans. So essentially that's it. Are there any questions on infrastructure or the multipurpose building? I think if that's the case, I guess I turn it over to Mary to talk about the stadium.
Thank you, Ron. Good morning, commissioners. And if you could please allow me to share my screen. And while that's happening, I'll provide a brief update on the MLS Stadium construction project. Okay. We'll also have an update on the mixed-use development at the April meeting. And as a reminder, the construction team's quarterly neighborhood update meeting is scheduled for Wednesday evening. The construction project remains on track, as Ron mentioned, both from a schedule and budget standpoint. I'm also very pleased to report that the DBE participation is currently at 37%, and we expect it to remain very close to this level throughout the remainder of the project. And as you may recall, the target of 30% was set back in 2018 when the construction management RFP was issued. And this is something that we knew it was a big goal, and we are thrilled to be able to meet and exceed it. I will also go ahead now and share some updated construction photos. So this view, we're looking towards the south end of the bowl, which is away from downtown. And you could see the significant progress that has been made over the past month, especially with the steel beams on the south end. You could see the pours on the concourses and also the lower seating bowl. And the steel work is expected to continue on through the summer. On the next slide here, you can again see another view of how the seating bowl continues to take shape. You can also notice the width of the concourses, and that will be able to accommodate the 30,000 fans that will be seating at the stadium. And then again, on the south side, you can begin to see where they've installed rakes on the steel support beams where they'll start the upper seating bowl. And the final slide I have here just shows some closer views of the various components with the upper rakes, with the crane that's on site, as well as some of the concrete pours and the continued work on the lower seating bowl. And I'll pause here, and I'm pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kavara, and thank you, Mr. Gobble and Mr. Henley. If there are no questions from the board, we will move on to the Speedway Motorsports update. So to recap where we stand today, last week it was announced that the mayor signed a letter of intent with SMI. We're going to hear from, I believe we've got Mr. Phillips and Mr. Tom Cross here. So we're going to hear from administration about what exactly that document is and is not. And then we'll hear from Mr. Caldwell with SMI. And then we're going to have time for the board to ask questions and give comments and discuss next steps in regards to negotiations and public engagement. So Mr. Phillips, Mr. Cross, do you want to kick it off?
Good morning and thank you. Bill Phillips here, and Tom Cross from Legal is with me. And Mark Sturdivant is also on the call, who is our project manager for the administration on a number of projects, including this proposed one. Last week, the mayor and Speedway Motors did sign a letter of intent. This wrapped up and formalized discussions that really began a year ago. They took this long because of unforeseen occurrences during 2020, which we're all very familiar with. And so we would have been to this point earlier if we hadn't have had those diversions throughout the year. It is exactly what it says, a letter of intent. The parties have all agreed on a foundation, and now it goes into formal discussions. Let me point out immediately that this board is the first point of decision. The administration will be involved in decision, and then the council. I want to say thank you to those who called in this morning and assure you you're heard. Our discussions have included the need, and the Bristol representatives have been very responsive to the need for public input, and that will be a definite part of any discussions as they move further. So please be assured of that. Living near the fairgrounds does bring on special considerations, and we want the neighborhood to be totally involved. The councilman, we have briefed him and have been asked him to continue his involvement in it as well, because it does need to go through the council for any final approval. So with that, I will throw it open for any questions you might have for Tom or Mark or myself. But we look forward to the coming weeks and months as we look and build this project that will be a part of the overall master plan for what can be a gem in our community. And that's the fairgrounds with the fair, soccer, other events, as well as the racing. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions you might have.
Chairwoman McAnally, this is Commissioner Bergeron. Can I ask a few questions?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Mr. Phillips, thanks for your comments. I do think that, obviously, I think that the Fair Board was a bit surprised by the letter of intent, the timing of it, and I know the community was very surprised. I think one thing that would have been awfully helpful in that letter of intent would have been to include any statement about needing to maintain or control community impact from this, because that's not in that letter of intent. And I've received probably over 100 contacts over the last few days because there's nothing in there about that. So that's just a note. But I'm very happy to hear about engagement. But now I also want to hear about community impact and a commitment. I would love to meet with you. I've been waiting to hear from the mayor's office for many, many weeks. I'd love to meet with you. Love to meet with the mayor to talk about community impact. We would love to hear a commitment for the mayor's office that means that there will be hard limits on race events, hard limits on track rentals, the two areas where there are motorsport activities going on, and want to hear a commitment that those limits are going to be there, but also that there are going to be appropriate financial guarantees in this transaction, either that Bristol Motor Speedway is fully guaranteeing the debt based on the four large events that are the focus of their operations, or that this will be funded by GO bonds that won't need the pressure of revenue. In either way, we end up at a place that, with those hard limits that everybody can live with, there's certainty if we go down this route for the community that they know the hard limits that are in effect, and that there's no risk down the road that we would have to exceed those limits because we don't have financial guarantees. So if you could address those items of hard community limits on event totals and curfews, and also financial guarantees, if you could address those two areas for me, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, first, Commissioner, I'm not aware that you've asked to see me, but we'll make that happen at your convenience. I'd look forward to visiting with you. I also want to point out that the board will be heavily involved and actually have to approve any agreement before it goes forward. On the items you mentioned, we have had discussions. Both sides are aware that we need to develop a solid plan that addresses all of those concerns, and that will be a part of the process. And I look forward to sitting down with you and getting, your ideas, but also your involvement in the approval process, or if you don't approve, the final result. So, but anyway, contact me here at the mayor's office, and I'll look forward to sitting down with you.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
And that's an invitation to each member. Of course, we have to meet individually, or we have an open meeting, but situation. But I'm glad to sit down with anybody anytime.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Do we have any other questions from the board?
Yes, Chairman McAnally. This is Commissioner Hammer.
Sure thing. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Looking at the LOI, we have a pretty, I would say, tight timeline to get the definitive agreements done by the end of July. So I was curious, from the administration standpoint, how do you see these conversations going, and what items, in terms of scheduling, do you feel like we will need to do in terms of the lease and whatnot, to hit that deadline?
Well, it's a very ambitious schedule, and that's in order to have the project under construction and completed as soon as possible. But we're not going to do that at the cost of less than a good, solid project. And I think Bristol agrees that we want to do this in the best way. But we have set that very, very ambitious schedule, and we'll do everything we can to meet that. But we also have our obligations. So,
this is Commissioner Weiner. I do have a follow-up question if Commissioner Hammer's finished.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Yeah, let me say, you'll be getting a schedule of in the next day or so of how we would see it. That's still being fleshed out, but we recognize the ambitious nature of it, certainly.
So, Mr. Phillips, to your point of the ambitious nature, knowing how things work up there insofar as getting things passed through council, and certainly having robust community engagement, I think my follow-up question to Commissioner Hammer would be, what are the ramifications if we don't get this done by the end of July?
I'm sorry, was that a question for me, Commissioner?
Whoever wants to answer it.
Yeah, if we don't make that schedule, it obviously will delay the project, which means the delay of actually going into the race season as early as everybody would like. And so that would delay it. If you miss a season, you're talking about at least a year. So.
And so there are no other legal ramifications, deadline, killing the deal that are baked into this at this point?
If I believe I'm correct in saying either party can at some point say that it is not working out. I would hope that doesn't happen.
Thank you so much.
Great. If we, any other questions from the board for administration? Okay, Mr. Caldwell, are you here? Did you want to chime in?
Yes, thank you, Chairwoman McAnally. I appreciate it. Thank you to the Fair Board and the Mayor's office. We certainly are, we are excited about this step forward, understanding that it is just a step forward, that, you know, now we have the framework to guide us down this path. I want to touch on maybe just a few of the guiding principles that really, you know, we've been having conversations around this effort for 3.5 years, but over a year with this administration. And number one has these really aren't in any order. They were all equally important, but financial obligation. Mayor Cooper and Deputy Mayor Phillips have made it very clear from the beginning that this had to be a financially sound agreement and pathway, and it couldn't impact the taxpayers. It has to be paid for by user fees, taxes generated on the property, our rent, and this basically shifting that model and obligation of what is there now from taxpayers to the users. And I think we have a very strong financial model in front of us with this project. The other is just our presence and our impact on the site and the neighborhood. We've been in business for over 60 years. We have facilities across the country: Las Vegas, Charlotte, Atlanta, Sonoma, California, Austin, Texas, just to name a few. We pride ourselves on being good neighbors and making sure that we bring a positive impact to the community, and this would certainly be part of that. With consistency, predictability, we want to address sound mitigation, as I've had conversations with all the Fair Board members on that, and making sure that this can bring a complete vision to the fairgrounds as a whole, and really take all of the other wonderful work that is going out there and elevate the racetrack to that same standard. We look forward also to community engagement. I appreciate the comments that were made at the beginning of the call. It sounds like there's a lot of misinformation out there, and we look forward to clearing that up. A few of those are a number of events. You know, we look forward to having that conversation with the Fair Board. The Fair Board will really work with us to set that, but we don't see the number of events increasing from what they currently are. Mayor Cooper and Deputy Mayor Phillips made it very clear that we'll have robust communications through this process. This facility belongs to Nashville, and this agreement will give us the framework to go forward, as I mentioned. We'll now be guided by that feedback from the community, and how do we work together to take this facility that has unfortunately been a drain and a bit of a liability, and make it a positive for the community, make it a community event facility that everyone can be proud of. And we'll work together and look forward to working together to complete that entire vision of the Speedway. And a couple of other things that were mentioned that we'll clear up in our community engagement, but I'll go ahead and touch on now. I think there was a reference to lots of events at Bristol Motor Speedway. No, a typical year at Bristol Motor Speedway, we'll have 3 motorsports events. And again, our community is a very important part of it. There's an elementary school that they are some of our dearest friends. They're less than a mile down the road, and we love working with them very often on how we work with STEM programs and other things, reading programs with the kids. And we look forward to having that same type of relationship in the community in Nashville. And we look forward to working with the chair, with Ms. Womack, and with the entire Fair Board and the Mayor's office and the council members to have a robust community engagement and being able to, again, create something that everyone can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Jerry. And before we take questions from Mr. Caldwell, just to the board, as we begin to look at public engagement, if you have items that you want to discuss for inclusion in those plans right now, we can do that now. You can also email Laura with priorities. Our sort of plan is to put together a plan that will be disseminated to the board for consideration. And at that point, if there are suggestions, tweaks, you can get them back to Laura. If there are serious concerns after seeing the plan that's put together, I'm more than happy to call a special meeting to discuss this. It's a high priority, the highest priority, that this needs to be an incredibly collaborative process between the four of us and the community. And I want to make sure that every board member is as involved as they want to be. So that being said, if there are any questions for Mr. Caldwell, or if we want to discuss that at all now, the floor is open.
Thank you, Chairwoman McNally. This is Commissioner Hammer. I appreciate those comments and concur with them. I think just, from my standpoint, I think seeing the schedule and the details around that laid out from the mayor's office is important. I hope we all take the opportunity to share our concerns and thoughts, et cetera, with the administration. And then, I plan on sharing them with Laura as well, so we can coordinate and be collaborative and help to give this the due diligence it deserves.
Any other comments or questions?
Chairwoman McInally, this is Commissioner Bergeron. Mr. Caldwell and I had a chance to talk yesterday, and I really appreciated his time, that one-on-one time. And I think we sort of talked about some different areas, and we certainly don't have just 100% agreement right now, but I think we do have common. I think I would not be speaking out of turn to say we both had common recognition of needs around community impact, and I really appreciated that. Just to sort of help with sort of terminology, so we all talk about the same things, and that's why I'm happy Mr. Caldwell's here. I kind of want to try to talk about the different categories a little bit, and he and I spent a lot of time talking about maybe that, so that everybody's kind of talking on the same page. We have the first category being that's sort of what we say races, right? Motorsports events / races. And I say events maybe because that maybe would include like perhaps a monster truck event or something like that. Or even in this case, a concert, because I know that is a possibility for one of the four major dates that fill in those events that surround those weeks in the LOI. And then there's sort of a second category of use, which is sort of that track rental / testing, which is, it can be sort of motorsports that aren't racing kind of thing. And then there's sort of this third category that we discussed around that could be like Convention and Visitor Bureau events or corporate events, or Nissan wants to show off its new Altima, which is a normal car and is operating at like under 80 decibels, things like that. But Mr. Caldwell, am I broadly capturing kind of those three areas we broadly talked about? Because I think it's helpful then when the board talks about community impact and stuff that we're all talking sort of about the same set of things.
Yes, that is what we discussed yesterday, and look forward to continuing that conversation again. When we're talking motorsports events or race cars on the track, we know there is an impact to the community, and we don't see the number of events increasing, just as we discussed yesterday, and look forward to putting some parameters around that as we move towards a written agreement on kind of what that looks like, how we define those, and how we make sure we're all staying on the same page. I think the other important piece there is to remember, we want this to be a long-term contract. We want to be long-term partners, and we want to be good neighbors in that area. So it's going to be important for us that we all work together, that we work with the Fair Board, with mixed use, with soccer, and with the community to make sure that this is good for everybody.
Thanks. And one other area I think will be helpful for the community is that the area we discussed around around those four weeks that are sort of set aside and laid out in the LOI. And you had sort of clarified for me, because I heard a lot of feedback for folks sort of envisioning 4 CMA Fest weeks in Wedgwood, Houston. And you sort of clarified what the structure and sort of a little bit of the background on what that means a little bit. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that clarification is really helpful.
Sure. When we reference 4 weeks, that does not mean that we're going to have 4 weeks with racing every day of the week and those types of things. That really was more of the 4 weeks is identified more from a business structure standpoint. And a typical NASCAR weekend, as we've discussed, would be potentially maybe a Friday, Saturday, Sunday type of an event. We're just identifying those weeks because we would be using the property during that time, but not impacting the community. We also we understand that, when we identify a number of dates that we would be doing motorsports events or hosting motorsports events, that's all inclusive. That's not a set number, and then these 4 weeks are set outside. When we're there, we understand that it's all inclusive. Does that clear it up?
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. I think that's an important clarification for everyone. So I really appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Commissioner Bergeron, thank you for those clarification questions. That was really helpful. Did you have more?
No, we have a community impact item under new business to talk about things, but I think that's more for board discussion. So I look forward to getting to that. But I appreciate Mr. Caldwell's time and look forward. I think everybody knows we have a lot of work ahead of us to find something workable. But I appreciate the conversations thus far.
Absolutely. Okay, great. If there are no other questions for Mr. Caldwell, thank you, Jerry. Look forward to working with you. Under new business, next up we have shelter update. Laura?
Yes, thank you, Laura Womack. We have Director Chief Swan here to talk a little bit about what the shelter status is. I know a lot of people are very interested in that transition for us to be able to reopen to events. We obviously are still under some limitations for mass gatherings due to the pandemic. So we are certainly exploring outdoor options and how those can be successfully and safely executed. So he is here, and I want to welcome him to give the board an update on where we are with the shelter.
So good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to actually speak to the board, and there's been a lot of healthy conversation that's happened so far. So I just want to really start off by just saying, giving my appreciation to Laura and the social services and the health department and so many others that have participated with sheltering with our homeless. And when we look at the situation that's happened around the world, of course, this being a pandemic, we have a lot of things to be proud of. And but we've been there at the shelter for almost a year now. And I understand everybody's eagerness to get back to, pre-COVID days. And we want to make sure that we look at the right solutions to actually help move to that area. The shelter has helped Nashville avoid outbreaks of COVID-19 among the homeless population. And as everyone knows, this part of our community who has to have a safe, secure, and stable place to await test results or recovery. The shelter in no short way has helped the pathway of Nashville staying reopened and helping get back on the pathway of healthiness just by all the actions that's been taken there. The shelter has helped relieve overcrowdedness at the rescue mission and Room at the Inn. But the unknown timeless for the pandemic has been tough for all of us. And we understand everybody, I guess, anxious frustration as far as getting back into what is normal. Many big events that we look forward to have been either postponed or canceled. You know, Steeplechase is postponed to June, and then the CMA Fest for 2021 has been canceled. So we understand what the pandemic has caused in the industry across Nashville. But we hope with the rollout of the vaccine and the plan that Metro has put in place, we can start now exploring measures to get back to a more normal manner of life. And if you look at the outdoor events, Laura and I, and actually Dr. Wright from the health department has spoke about trying to at least get back into allowing certain events to happen as long as the guidelines, the CDC guidelines are followed. And we've learned so much with COVID-19 over this past year, and we're still learning. And the CDC has sent out updates constantly, and we try to make sure that we look at the science, making sure it moves our actions. And I'm very proud of Nashville because I think the things that we've done here has just really has been a model for the country. And then when you talk about the fairgrounds, think about you've housed almost 35,000 homeless people. That's amazing. And on top of that, you have the cold weather shelter that's there. So I cannot begin to just the big things that I have in my heart, probably will not come out in my words, but it's been amazing. And there's so many people has been a part of it. But I know the big question is, what is the timeline for us to get back to that normal? When is the timeline to exit out of the fairgrounds so that it can go back to a normal? And we want to make sure that we look at the smartest and the healthiest way to protect, of course, our homeless, and to make sure that when we close the shelter, that it's closed, and we won't have to close it and then a month later open it. So there's a lot of variance here, but we are going to intentionally look at a metrics. We're going to build a metrics to figure out what is the best way to start scaling back. And it's going to be based off of the vaccination rate versus contraction or infection rate. But we will constantly keep you up to date as we now start looking at, we're coming into the spring, and of course the warm weather, and then also the vaccination that we have actually put in place in the city. As you know, now with the vaccination opening up, we have Johnson & Johnson. We're going to do a March the 20th. We're going to have a vaccination day where any and everybody can come get vaccinated. We have actually 10,000 kits to actually be able to vaccinate our citizens and visitors and friends. So we're going to utilize that as well to help just move forward with getting people vaccinated. The health department has already worked with the mission and Room at the Inn, making sure that everyone that's there that wants to get vaccinated have been vaccinated. So it's been a lot of work that's been put in place to try to at least set the stage for us to start exiting out. Now, one good positive sign is the municipal auditorium where we house the females. We're actually going to, in April, we're going to close down the municipal and move those that are in that facility to the cold weather shelter at the fairgrounds. And that's just one phase of us starting to scale back. And then as we look again at the metrics, get with Dr. Wright, and we'll get with Room at the Inn and the mission to be able to expand their capacity, then we'll start pulling it from the fairgrounds. But again, I just want to thank everybody for all the hard work that's been done. And I hope that everybody that's a part of this call has taken the opportunity to go down to the fairgrounds and see just how deliberate and intentional that place has been set up. When we first set up there was a lot of criticism, but we stick to our guns, and we've done things again by the accordance of CDC. And we even had officials from Washington, D.C. come down and look at the facility, and they were very much impressed. So again, I just want to thank Laura and thank all the board members and just for your patience. And we are very much aware of everyone getting back to a normal, and we just ask that you, stay the course with us, but we are going to intentionally look at trying to downscale. So I'm open for any questions that may be on your head. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Swan, and I'm so glad that our facilities have been of service. We appreciate you being here with us today, and I want to open it up for questions, but I do appreciate the openness, and I look forward to more, because while we are glad to be of service, we have a lot of customers and clients that we want to keep updated as well, and so I think us all being in constant contact is great.
Thank you.
Are there any?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions from the board?
Yes, Chairwoman McAnally, this is Commissioner Hammer. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Swan. We echo the Chairwoman's comments, and we're glad we were able to facilitate and be a resource for your department and the community and the most vulnerable members of the community during this very, very trying period over the past year. And appreciate your comments around, trying to figure out the best and quickest way to move forward and help us get back to business as usual. As you know, the predicament we are in, as well as trying to let our customers and clients know our situation and get things moving forward. So lastly, with the CDC's new guidance that came out Monday, allowing those vaccinated with to be able to congregate indoors together. I'm assuming that eases your situation and the various shelter situation up quite a bit with our homeless residents. So I was curious, with that being kind of new information that just came out yesterday, is that going to be able to move up the timeline of closing the fairgrounds facility and moving the homeless population back to their normal shelters?
Good question, and definitely the CDC's recommendation, the guidelines that just came out, as you stated yesterday, and Dr. Wright, myself, and others have not even had a chance to dissect that as of yet, but it is very promising, because it basically states that those if you've been vaccinated, then and you can be in an enclosed area without having to wear a mask. But we also know that, again, the problem lies with just having a false sense of security and not letting your guard down too quick. But we're going to be looking at all of that. And I was very, I guess when I read that yesterday, I was very excited over it. And especially when you start talking about just moving closer to getting back to what we consider somewhat of a normal. But we're going to take a heavy look at that. And what I'm going to promise is, one of the things that I think we didn't do a good job at is, we talk to Laura quite often, but I think it was very important, and I was so appreciative to be invited to speak, because I think one of the things that we miss, and I'm being the Director of Fire and Office of Emergency Management, we want to make sure that we keep everyone informed and up to date with everything. I mean, 2020 has just been such a year of so many challenges. And then we walked into 2021 and walked into the ice storm. But still, that's no excuse. And we're going to be more intentional and definitely start looking at, starting to look at the phase of, scaling down and giving back the fairgrounds to you guys to do what y'all do best.
Thank you. We appreciate that, and very much looking forward to that day as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chief Swan? Okay, great. Thank you so much for being with us. Next up, we have event update. Laura?
Thank you. Laura Womack. So we talked a little bit about events, and again, in my discussion recently with Director Chief Swan and Dr. Gill, right from the health department, you know, we certainly told them that we would like to get back into at least an outdoor event setting, certainly focusing on our own flea market to have at least an option for an outdoor market, understanding that there will still be capacity limits for vendors and for shoppers. We are, you know, fine tuning a plan that we put together at the end of last year to see if we can, you know, adjust anything, but we will be submitting that to public health for their feedback so that we can at least get a capacity level for that. So I want to thank staff for kind of staying the course and helping navigate the changing guidance that we see coming out, and we will adjust, and we'd like to target May if that works with certainly the numbers, and we've got approval, the necessary approvals from OEM and public health to proceed with an outdoor market. So I want to just kind of update you on that. We are also continuing to move forward on the proposed concert series that you all heard about from Genevieve last month. We're just kind of looking at, again, we've got some dates that we've put holds on the calendar, and we are just finalizing some terms there. So that is progressing. We also have another event. We actually held it last year as well. This is a firefighters benefit concert, and we do have a couple members from that group that would like to share with you their vision of the event, what it's for, and some of the COVID protocols that they will be employing to keep that outdoor event safe. That still has to be shepherded through OEM and public health as well for approval. But we do have Mark Young and Clyde Masters on the line if I can turn the floor over to them to talk about their event.
Thank you, Laura. Mark Young. I am the president of the International Association of Firefighters. We represent all the employees of the Nashville Fire Department. What we have and have had for 40 years is a fundraising event, and we do 2 concerts a year, one in April and one in October. For the past 40 years, or past 30 years at least, they have been held at the Nashville Municipal Auditorium. So we know the challenges of an event at the auditorium with what we just heard from Chief Swan about the homeless. So we approached the fairgrounds last year for an October event, and we was able to have our event at the fairgrounds. And we used the social distancing and the CDC guidelines that D&D actually uses during a race event, which worked out great. D&D has the bleachers taped off and spaced out for social distancing. And then we also, at the ticket booths, would have masks available and sanitizer for anybody that would come into the event that may not have the mask or forgot to bring it. So I think going forward, we do have a event in April. It's on the books. I think we've got to get approval from the board to move forward. The way that, I'll just explain the fundraising aspect of this. We sell tickets throughout the year for these 2 events, and then we support over 30 nonprofits in Nashville. Some of the major nonprofits that we support would be the Burn Camp. That's a camp for children that have suffered burns. We support a Camp Horizon. That's a camp for cancer survivors, children. We support the tax relief program in Nashville. So you have probably, some people on this call have probably received a phone call from our office asking you to purchase a ticket, and it's explained to you during that call what these funds go for. We also call in the surrounding counties. We call in Rutherford County, Wilson County, and for the same thing, the fire unions in those counties also use their funds to support different pieces of interest, what they choose to support in the same way. Our October event was the turnout for that event was very low, and there was some reasons for that. We sold the tickets for that event to go to the municipal for that show to be there. Then that was canceled, and then the dates got changed. There was a lot of mix up in that. However, we still held the event. It's a great facility for this. Nashville needs some type of place where small events can be held. There's no way we could ever afford to put on an event at Bridgestone or the Ascend Theater. The talent that we bring in, that's negotiated at a very reasonable rate that at the end of the day leaves us with enough funds to support the charities that we use. It's working out great. D&D has been awesome with direction for our first time to move to the fairgrounds. The only thing that I could say I wish was a little bit better at the fairgrounds, but we'll live with it, is the power. You got to have a certain amount of electricity to run a good sound system. And we ended up having to rent a generator because there wasn't power at the stage. I don't know if that's something that, maybe the board would like to see what that would take to bring power to that stage. But if not, we'll rent the generator again. But it's, I'm just thankful that we have a place that we can continue a 40-year program. And I appreciate all the board members, and congratulations, Sherry, to your reappointment. And I'm here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Could you speak a little bit more about what your COVID plan is?
So the COVID plan would be to follow what D&D has in place. D&D's recommendation for the social distancing. If that's okay, we would love to follow that because it works for their events, and it would definitely work for our event. And that is how they tape off and section off the bleachers. That would be. We would love to follow that same layout.
Okay, and I'm sorry if I missed this, but did you talk about expected capacity?
Well, I'll tell you, we probably had 15 at the October show.
Okay.
And there was a lot of mix-up, and the reason that number was low, there was a lot of unknowns. It's very hard. We sell these tickets, and you actually get the ticket in your hand before you even make payment. It's kind of done on the honor system. A lot of people will purchase tickets to the show and actually send the ticket back to us, and with payment and ask us to just comp that ticket to someone who might not like to go. But I would say that this April show, the show is Journey, the resurrection of Journey. My guess would our numbers are going to be between 500 and 750.
Okay, so Laura, forgive me if I'm wrong, but that would need to be, no matter what, run through the health department, correct?
Yes, that's correct. We'll be facilitating application from this group to the health department for approval. And that has, right now, the forms are temporarily taken down from the public health website only because they're updating them with the latest change to the phasing of the reopening. So we'll be going ahead and submitting that along with Mr. Young in order for their review and approval.
Okay, great. Do we have any other questions from the board, from Mr. Young or Laura?
This is Commissioner Bergeron. I sort of in line with your questions, Chairwoman McAnally. I think I would just like to know that a more detailed plan is happening, and I was really impressed with what the NS2 folks had done and showed us last meeting, and so just would hope staff would be looking for similar kind of details and thoughtfulness and all of that. Thanks.
Yes, they had submitted a plan earlier that we sent back just to have some additional consideration for spectator distancing. So we'll be looking to have that beefed up before it goes to public health.
Thank you, Laura.
Laura, Mark Young, I guess I have a question. So the plan that D&D uses for race events does our plan need to, because our numbers, our spectator numbers would be lower than theirs. Does our plan need to be different than that, or is their plan not what we need?
Well, Mr. Young, the plan that we used from Track Enterprises for the race season last year was specific to race events, and that was approved by Metro Public Health. So what we need to make sure is that while a plan is certainly a good starting point, anything that is a little bit different, because this is a benefit concert versus a race, I'm sure there are subtle differences in how back of house or maybe the stage is utilized from your event versus a race. So we just need to make sure that for the most part, I think from a spectator point of view, their plan is acceptable. But there are going to be subtle differences that we need to make sure that we consider for a concert versus a race. So that's where we would look for to make sure that it is specific to your event and not a cut and paste, I guess, from the racing event. But that is a good base and it is a good start. And we're happy to help you with that to make sure that those details to your event are present.
Hey, Mark and board members, this is Chief Swan again. I want to just comment, if I would. The CDC guidelines, along with the health department, can help guide Mark what procedures that you should take. So if you'd like to later, just get with me and we'll go down that, venture down that alley and get it figured out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Swan. It's very kind. Laura, do we have anything else in events?
Not at this time, thanks.
Okay, great. Then we will move on to the final new business item, community impact discussion.
Thank you. I can just very briefly kick this off. So this was a requested agenda item to generally talk about community impact. And I think certainly with the recent discussions and the public comment that we've heard, I think the racetrack has a tendency to come to mind. But this is, I think, an opportunity for overall discussion. There was certainly community impact discussions when we did our community engagement for the soccer and mixed use. We did some community impact discussions as it related to our outdoor music events, and especially when we talked about noise and curfews. So it is something overall that the board has discussed in various capacities over the years. And I think the focus today is going to be generally what does community impact look like? It can be many forms, of course, which we've already heard, but just a general discussion on maybe what those priorities are from the board's perspective. And I'll certainly turn it over to any of the commissioners if they have anything specific that they'd like to discuss as it relates to that.
Commissioner Bergeron, you want to kick it off?
Sure, and I appreciate that this is being placed sort of as a standalone matter. I think it's a very vital discussion to have, and I guess based on the discussions that are here today, I think the way I would suggest, the way I would start is to talk that because we're entering this with regard to this possibility of Speedway Motorsports, and we're starting public engagement, right? And I kind of wish that had happened before the mayor signed the LOI, but in any event, it is starting. And I guess when we talk about community impact, I want to stress that I think community impact starts with community engagement, right? We have to hear from the community, and I think it's really vital that there is a really robust community engagement process around the future of the Speedway, at least the same that happened for soccer, right? And as to this deadline of July 31st, I'm sure we could ask our good lawyers from Metro Legal, but I mean, we can extend an LOI. We can extend an LOI anytime we want, and I think that community engagement needs to be robust, not rushed, as surrounding what we're doing here and overall. And I've already said a little bit, but to Mr. Caldwell's credit, he recognized that when I spoke with him yesterday, and I encouraged Mr. Caldwell to talk directly with these groups, and I hope he does. I did express some honest concerns with him, and I didn't want to put him on the spot during the meeting today about some of the groups reaching out initially for them. There's a certain astroturfing firm that we all know very well at the fairgrounds that has made some outreach to some community groups that then came to me and said, what is going on? Who is this and what's being spun? And to credit to Mr. Caldwell, he heard what I said. And so I encouraged him to have direct discussions with all these groups. Because we need to not be talking about spin and not be talking about, some idea of the plan, and not talk about saying like, well, transparency about what's going on is a replacement for real community impact limits. And so with that in mind, I was kind of hoping, and I'm happy to talk about some other pieces too, per Laura's comments, but I was kind of hoping to walk through some of those real hard fought limits that and community impact standards that we've realized regarding the Speedway over the years, just so like the board is all aligned on knowing what they are. We may not all be aligned on what they should be or what they will be in the future, but I was hoping to kind of have a discussion about some of those key points. So there's common awareness, just like there was common awareness about the categories I talked about earlier. So we're all sort of speaking on the same language. And I think the thing I'm hoping is recognized is that, there is a pretty unfortunate history going back 30, 40, 50 years in this community. I think you heard some of the community members talk about it. And that was that this is a community that's very diverse and and also lower and middle income, and has at times really not had a voice about what happens at the fairgrounds. It's kind of been a playground for other folks to come and leave. And it took it wasn't until maybe a decade or so ago that fair board started to sort of listen and implement some reasonable community standards, especially as to the Speedway. And in the current contract where we are is, a few big things. We have limits on the number of race events. We have limits on the number of track rentals, and we have curfews. And we have time standards for when things can and can't happen. I want to talk about what those standards look like in a world where there is a potential new, larger speedway facility, a brand new facility. This isn't a renovation. This is a brand new facility. And I'm hoping we can kind of talk through what the future of kind of race numbers look like and what that means for community impact, the future of track rentals look like and what that means for community impact, and other expectations to protect things like Fall Hamilton School, where vital work goes on every day addressing trauma-informed education of students, addressing an enormous, burgeoning, diverse community around there. And so, hoping to kind of take those a little bit step by step here. I'll take a break and a breath and let somebody else talk for a minute, but maybe we could kind of walk through a couple of those things one by one in a few minutes.
This is Commissioner Weiner. I'd like to pop in if I might.
Sure.
Is there, and this is just because I'm so new in this, is there a document that speaks to the priorities that Commissioner Bergeron is referring to?
Not that I'm aware of.
It would be helpful to me, given that we've got a lot of changes and a lot of things on our plate insofar as the racetrack potential changes. I would like to see more data before I jump into a big conversation about this. If somebody could provide me with some historical perspective that we could kind of digest and then come into the conversation with more information so that we can be more direct and we go with this.
Chair, it's Laura. Sure. If it is helpful, at least for Commissioner Weiner's point that she just made, and as well as the board, I think there are several details within the current contract that I could pull out and summarize. And if it's helpful, I could also do that for earlier agreement so you can kind of see the transition and the changes over time, if you think that would be helpful.
That would be great for me, but Commissioner Weiner, would that satisfy what you're talking about?
That would be so helpful. I really appreciate that.
Commissioner Bergeron, I want to thank you for bringing this up, and along with being stewards of the property and having a symbiotic and healthy relationship with the community, which is of utmost importance, we also have to talk about, and this is why what you're saying about the timeline being such a crunch, that this has financial implications as well. With no financial guarantee to our property in the LOI, and with us potentially being shut down for operations for 4 weeks out of the year, looking at balancing how the community is affected with those financial implications it's going to take time. And so I think it's really important to have these conversations. Can't happen without each other. So I think it's really important that we have these open, transparent conversations about it. So thank you.
I really appreciate that comment. I think that's important. And if I could just for a minute, I don't know if Commissioner Weiner's comments mean we need to park this per se, but I'd like to at least kind of lay out some ideas that I'd like y'all to think about, and on a couple areas, and it connects it ultimately, and I'll get there in a second, connects very much to what Chairwoman McAnally just said. From what I've heard so far from the community, and I think there were some comments earlier talking along these lines, we've got to contain community impact and acknowledge that at the top end, certainly some of the biggest events being talked about are much bigger than have ever been done in the history of the fairgrounds and speedway. And so, we and Laura's summary will show that generally we have around 10 motorsport event weekends per year. I really would like this board to think really hard about the fact that the top end is going to push things a lot further. And I think we really need to look at a number that is less than that, a number that sits around 7 or 8 per year. Track rentals has been a subject that I've spoken about again and again and again, and we finally have gotten that down to a limit of 25 this year. I think that in that universe, in the future of what we're dealing with, I think that has to be something less than 20. So we're getting in about two per month or so during the actual racing time. And then, around those other corporate events and things like that, where just ensuring that that's not a sort of a thing where a race car is going around the track, if we're talking about that. But to Chairman McAnally's point, it's like, how do we get there, right? How do we ensure that those commitments are honored to the community in the framework of a very complicated agreement that is supposed to, at least is what it's said, is bring some financial stability. I think it's multifaceted, and I've talked with Metro Legal about this as well. I think not only does it have to be baked into the agreements and to the extent necessary baked into the bond documents, so there's an acknowledgement that endless events are not there to fund those bonds, and we have a couple different I have not clearly heard whether it's general obligation bonds or revenue bonds, but then the other way I think it's done is through board policy. I think, and Metro Legal has talked to me about the fact that any board policy would need to be done in advance of the bonds being issued. And so I think that has to walk on. We need to be committing to what we're requiring in the agreements to also say, okay, this is going to be it. And I think that it's my belief that I think Bristol needs to make covenants with the community by a community benefits agreement to say, yeah, these are the standards. We're making that commitment to the community, whatever those limits are. But none of that matters, as Chairman McAnally just said, if we don't have a financial backbone and structure that makes sense, where we have full assurance that in 3, 5, 8 years, we aren't running into a situation where there's a gap between debt, revenue from those high end 4 big event weekends that Bristol's focused on, and our debt obligations. And that puts Metro in a position of having to just chase events, which is not an easy thing to do with racing, where you're always trying to steal an event from somewhere else. This isn't like soccer, where they have guaranteed number of games being in a league. And so, that financial question, Chairwoman McAnally, is so important, because this plan has to be guaranteed and or based on bond obligations then don't drive that pressure that whatever standards we come to and say, okay, this has got to be it. This is how we are a good neighbor to our neighbors, our the community who we're trying to bring a voice into this. Everybody else has lots of people who are paid a lot of money to make their voices heard. The community doesn't have that, and we've got to bring that to bear. But all the promises we make in the world about necessary community standards to acknowledge the reality of the situation won't matter a lick if the financial realities of this plan aren't fully guaranteed by that limited universe. And I think that's something that's so very important. And I would love to have this discussion every meeting for the next 5 meetings. And if Laura wants to get some of those hard details about those last few racing contracts, and I could talk about how we've evolved some of those standards and what has and hasn't worked, especially with our previous promoter, to help inform what needs to be in this new plan from a community impact standpoint. I think we should be talking about that a lot.
I agree with you, Jason, and I don't want to overcommit my fellow co-commissioner, so you can totally have an opposing opinion here. But to speak to, I believe, what Heidi said earlier, this is happening amidst a pandemic, and so it complicates things. And granted, we have not come to a conclusion on a plan for public engagement yet, and we're still to look at that. I just want to say that this is very important. This rollout is very important, and these negotiations are very important, and I'm more than happy to hold special meetings to discuss this. So in addition, Jason, what I'm saying is in addition I agree with you. I think this should be a part of our regular meetings. But if anything comes up, if any of my fellow co-commissioners feel like there's reason to have a public conversation outside of these meetings, the scheduled meetings, I'm more than happy to contemplate that and host those as well.
One suggestion I have real quick, throw it in, is as to that engagement plan, as we talk about it, I've thought of it from when we talked about before, as we start to see the rollout for different community groups. And I know Councilman Sledge has been providing feedback on the appropriate community groups who need to be talked to. I would suggest that it'd be a really good idea for board members, the commissioners, to sit in on some of those meetings between the community and the mayor's office in Bristol. Just, say, I'm planning on doing it to the extent I get the meetings and just want to hear what's being said from everybody, and I would think it'd be a really good idea and of course, making sure that, if two of us can't sit in a community meeting for fear of, even if maybe we're just listening, for fear of open meetings backsaid, it's just one of us if necessary. But I think that should be in the mix as Laura and Chairwoman McNally talk about community engagement plans. I really suggest that it'd be really beneficial for all the commissioners to hear that give and take in different opportunities outside of whatever the Fair Board does on itself for having Fair Board sponsored meetings.
I agree. And to that point, Alex, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you know if there are implications of more than one of us listening into a meeting?
It's not a problem as long as you limit your participation. We just advise when it comes to open meetings, if you're part of an informational session where you're just listening, it's not a problem for more than one of you to be there. Similar to if all of you attended an educational seminar, you could all be there so long as there's not back and forth participation, because that can start to get into a negotiation.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Great. Anything else from the board?
Yes, Commissioner. I want to recommend that just to maximize transparency, when we have been offered a plan of action from the administration, that we set a special meeting that we can sit down in an open forum and address it and tweak it insofar as what applies to us and how we move forward. I think it needs to be as open and transparent, for lack of a different word, so that the community is fully aware of what we're doing as we move through this.
Agree. Absolutely.
Chairwoman McAnally, Commissioner Hammer.
Sure thing.
To that point, for Commissioner Weiner, Laura, if you could remind us, I think you sent an email letting us know that next month or a certain date we will be having in-person meetings again. Is that correct?
So we've gotten some feedback. It's Laura. We've gotten some feedback that it is a possibility for May to return to in-person meetings. So I think we'll know more in the next month.
Thank you.
Laura, this is Commissioner Bergeron. On that point, I think that's an important sort of consideration of what we're doing here. And I did want to throw out that if we are going back to public sooner rather than later, thinking about the venue, because I do know that our occasional meetings at 50 Forward are logistically difficult and in a very limited space as it is. And if the governor were to decide that he thinks public meetings are ready to happen, even though the pandemic isn't close to over, we figure out and sort of try to get creative on an option for allowing the public to feel safe appearing in ways. And 50 Forward is an awfully tough, while they're wonderful folks and a great part of the campus, the space itself is especially in this current environment, is an awfully tough space for really robust community engagement. And I don't have a good solution right now on what we do otherwise.
Well, to that point, Commissioner Bergeron, and this may be a terrible idea, and someone from Metro can chime in, but when Laura and I were originally talking about this, I suggested that we at least look into, see if it's possible to do it at MCC where City Council was meeting.
Yeah.
So that could be a potential, and we could also look at potential outdoor events. We're definitely on that and sort of trying to stay ahead of that decision by the governor. We'll certainly keep everybody looped in on that. Okay, does anyone else have anything else on this final agenda item? Okay, great. Well, thank you to everyone. If we don't have any further business, then do we have a motion to adjourn?
This is Commissioner Weiner, so moved.
Commissioner Hemmer, second.
We'll take a roll call vote. Commissioner Hemmer?
Aye.
Commissioner Bergeron?
Aye.
Commissioner Weiner?
Aye.
I'm an aye as well. Thank you everyone for being here, and we'll see you next month, if not sooner.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.